Hi, and thank you for tuning into Noir Histoire. I'm Natasha, and in this episode, I'll be sharing what I've learned about Léopold Sédar Senghor, born on October 9, 1906, died on December 20th, 2001, notable poet and politician, nationality, Senegalese. Léopold Sédar Senghor was born in Jol, Senegal, to Nalain Bakam, his Fulani mother, and Bassi Senghor, his Mandinka father. Bassi was a wealthy man who supported his 4 wives and 25 children with the proceeds of his vast land holdings and thousands of heads of cattle. Senghor was given a European first name to reflect the family's noble status and religion, while his middle name, which means the one you cannot humiliate, came from his father's Serra culture. Nalain had been born into a Christian family and was a practicing Roman Catholic. When Senghor was around 7 or 8 years old, he was enrolled at a local Catholic mission boarding school, Fathers of the Holy Spirit, where he began learning French. By the age of 13, Senghor had decided that he would enter the priesthood and enrolled in a seminary in Dakar a few years later. Yet he was discouraged from continuing at the seminary and left to attend a secular school. He graduated from high school with honors and distinguished himself in the study of classical languages and math. At the time, Senegal was a French colony, and a teacher lobbied for colonial administration for a scholarship that would enable Senghor to continue his education in France. Senghor arrived in Paris at the age of 22 and briefly attended the Sorbonne before moving on to the Lycée Louis-le-Grand in preparation for the École Normale Supérieure entrance exam. After completing his studies, Senghor eventually achieved high qualifications as a teacher, which enabled him to teach at both high schools and universities. This was quite the achievement, as he was the first African to reach the rank of agrégé. Along the way, he met and befriended several future politicians and intellectuals. Senghor was one of several intellectuals from across the French colonized black diaspora who had immigrated to France to study in Paris. They were greeted by a society where racism was prevalent, and people used the word nègre as an offensive term for black people. In response, they began to develop the ideology of negritude, a cultural and political movement aimed at promoting pride in being black and black culture. Within a few years of arriving in France, Senghor had become a French citizen and served in the French army during World War II. When France was invaded by Germany in 1940, Senghor was taken prisoner and narrowly escaped being executed after a French officer intervened on behalf of the African prisoners. He spent about 2 years being moved between various camps and used the time to write some of his most notable poetry. Senghor was eventually released and returned to teaching, though he remained an active participant in the French resistance. He married his first wife, Jeannette Eboué, in 1946 and also became a representative of Senegal in the French National Assembly, where he would serve 2 terms. A year later, he and his wife welcomed their first son. In 1948, Senghor published the anthology of New Black and Malagasy poetry in French and welcomed his second son. The marriage would end in divorce in 1955, though Senghor would remarry and have a third son. The 1950s would see Senghor splitting his time between teaching and serving in the Assembly in France and occupying various political offices in Senegal. During this time, African nations were pushing closer to independence from colonial rule. Senghor hoped for a political future where African nations and their European colonizers would operate as equals. This was not what either side of the colonial debate wanted, as European countries were not interested in equality or African progression, nor did African revolutionaries have interest in a colonial federalist government. Movements for independence continued to make their way through Africa, and Senegal became independent in 1960 after leaving the Mali Federation. In September of that year, Léopold Sédar Senghor was elected as the independent nation's first president. Early in Senghor's presidency, responsibilities were split with the then Prime Minister, Mamadou Dia. The idea was that Senghor would focus on foreign relations while Dia would helm the country's long-term development plans. Things did not go according to plan, as Dia would end up spending 12 years in prison after being arrested for plotting a coup. In 1967, Senghor escaped an attempt on his life. Senghor would serve as president for 20 years before resigning during his 5th term. During his presidency, he adopted a form of African socialism which contained some aspects of capitalism. His efforts stabilized the economy, established a solid educational system, and allowed for multiple political parties. He also penned the country's national anthem. Following his resignation, Senghor moved to France, where he published a memoir and additional volumes of poetry. He became the first black person to be elected to the Académie Française, a council on the French language that dates back to 16 1935. Léopold Sédar Senghor died at his home in France on December 20th, 2001 at the age of 95. Thanks for tuning in. Show notes and sources are available on the Noir Histoire website via the link in the episode description. I'm working on creating downloadables and infographics, so keep an eye on the website. These Black History Facts are released every Tuesday, so if you enjoyed this episode and want more, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my Black History Facts playlist.